All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here, our 2025 preview and prediction for the Ole Miss Rebels. Getting things started with the coaching staff. Lane Kiffin, 44-18 record through 5 years. Charlie Weiss will be his fourth-year offensive coordinator, and then Pete Golding will be his third season with the Rebs in that role as well. Pretty important offseason for them. They're third in portal, at least as of right now, and 16th in high school recruiting. Went 10-3 a season ago, Nick, including a loss to Kentucky. Ended up losing late in the year to Florida. And I want to get your quick opinion on this, Nick, because I've always been a big fan of Lane Kiffin, but I've absolutely been incredibly frustrated with how he acted after they blew it against Florida and missed their opportunity in the college football playoff. I don't think that his comments made any sense at all. You guys had an opportunity, and you blew it. The two teams you quite frankly should have beat. You didn't make the playoffs because of that. It has nothing to do with the committee one bit, and for him just to continuously run his mouth this offseason, I thought was very sour, and I don't think it's the right message to your fan base or your football roster at all. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's the wrong message. I really just did not like the way that he handled it. Go out there and beat the teams on your schedule. Don't ask the committee for favors. Go out there and get the job done. Beat the teams on your schedule, and there you go. You cannot be losing to Kentucky, at home nonetheless, to a Kentucky team that won 4 games last year. That's an inexcusable loss. You just cannot do that. You had an ample opportunity to go out and get the job done. You could have won at LSU. You blew that game in Baton Rouge. Certainly a tougher environment. I give you a bit of a mulligan there. That was a good LSU team. But then you lose on the road at the end of the season at Florida in a tough situation. You got to go out and win these games. It doesn't really matter. And, he wants to run his mouth and talk about how they should have been in the playoffs, this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, you lost 3 games in regular season, and that's just not enough to get you in the playoffs. I give them credit because they went out and they did win their bowl game. They absolutely put a beating on Duke, which some teams that missed out on the playoffs, including a certain team I'm a fan of, did not do that, did not go make a statement in their bowl game. They went out and did that, which I guess I give some credit to Kiffin, but the way that his antics on social media, it's just rubbing some people the wrong way. And I think another, big key thing here is that Ole Miss just does not play a tough non-conference ever. They play a cakewalk every single year of a non-conference. I think it's hurting them because if you lose a game in the SEC, you don't have any more wiggle room. If they had played a stronger non-conference, that might have helped them in those conversations. But when you're playing Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, you're not helping yourself, and then you end up losing a game like Kentucky at home. It really ruins your margin for error and puts you in a bad situation. I really don't think he has any right to run his mouth really at this point, because you just go out there and win the games, Lane. It's not that difficult.
Yeah, and against Florida, true running backs, I think, had either 1 or 0 carries as well, so it's almost like you guys weren't taking it that serious to begin with. They kept doing halfback dives with their defensive tackle, which at times had worked for them, but they got stuffed like 5 or 6 times, it feels like, in that game against Florida. So take it a little bit more serious, I'd say, with Kiffin. Moving to this offense, though, I think this is a respectable unit despite only returning 3 starters, as they went absolutely ballistic in the portal. We're going to start with a guy that was on roster a season ago, though, in Austin Simmons. He's going to get the keys to the offense. Came in against Georgia and calmly led them downfield to a touchdown drive. The lefty shows a quick release. He can throw on the run. I liked his arm strength to the boundary, showcasing his brief appearances, good pocket mobility, nice downfield touch. He played baseball in high school, and you can clearly see that in his savviness when throwing the football. Didn't play much overall and had a lot of one-read play calls. I'm really excited to see what he can do. That was an X3 star at 6'4", 215, Nick. Small sample size, but it's highly impressive. I mean, for you to come in and go against Georgia and lead a touchdown drive with ease, 5 for 6 and 64 yards in that score, I mean, that was highly impressive.
Very pretty release on the lefty here. I really like his accuracy. I think he's a guy that you can really use here as a high upside quarterback. I don't think a lot of people are talking about Austin Simmons. You're hearing a lot of love for some of the quarterbacks that are stepping in at other big programs like Gunnar Stockton and Ty Simpson at Georgia and Alabama, respectively. But I don't think, Austin Simmons is getting enough love at Ole Miss. I think this is a kid that has a lot of high upside, a lot of traits that you look for in a Kiffin system. Jackson Dart played really good football last year, ended up getting drafted in the first round. I think Simmons is a really talented quarterback that can elevate in the system. The system certainly does shelter you a little bit as a quarterback. So I think there's some room for improvement here and some rooms to mitigate mistakes early on. I think he's a really accurate passer. Like I said, I think the release is quite beautiful. The footwork is solid as well. Not sure if he's going to be able to really be an effective runner as much as previous quarterbacks in the Kiffin era, but I still think he's a very accurate quarterback to be solid in the pocket, hit his receivers on a dart, and he does have a great wide receiver room to throw to, so that certainly helps.
Now you look at the run game, I thought this was a pretty respectable group last year. Coming into the season, they were incredibly deep at running back, but due to injuries and whatnot, they just completely folded at the position as the year went on. They had 4 games to start the year against that cakewalk non-conference, Nick, of 200-plus rushing. They only had 1 the rest of the year. That was against Mississippi State, the worst run defense in the conference. I mean, this has typically been the bread and butter of the Ole Miss offenses. They like to get things going with the ground attack, and that allows them to move with a lot of tempo, and at least under Jeff Lebby. That's why they were so successful on offense. And that's starting to fade out a little bit, it seems, under Kiffin the past couple of years. Logan Diggs, though, they get him back from injury, a violent runner. He was productive in what was a loaded room for LSU back in 2023. Showcases great balance, 6'1", 215 pounds. Dom Thomas, he's still in this room, but he's never really saw the field in his career. Even last year, when he did get some field reps, he failed to showcase any efficiency. I think a few transfers are going to be slotted here at running back 2. Jordan Simmons from Akron. It was an impressive zone runner, showcased great ball security as well. Keywan Lacey comes over from Missouri, a player of great speed and big playmaking prowess. The pass-catching upside as well. Pretty good backfield here. Certainly hope for better health this season, Nick. But again, that run game is just kind of starting to fade out a little bit as of late. And they also picked up Damian Taylor here late in the cycle as well from Troy. Pretty solid runner there. What do you make of this ground attack in 2025?
I think Logan Diggs is a solid back. He's got some good speed on him. I like the footwork. Some of the field vision is really solid. An aggressive runner that hits the hole hard. I think Dom Thomas can show a little bit here. Obviously, he hasn't had the most successful career at Ole Miss, but I think he's still a talented player. And then Keywan Lacey was a decent add, as was Damian Taylor out of the portal. I think Taylor could be a solid late addition from Troy. He had a successful season there last year. Diggs is probably the number one running back here. This is a weaker room, certainly by Ole Miss standards. I don't think it's a glaring, missed opportunity, but I think it's still a unit that might let them down a little bit in some of those tougher games. Like you mentioned, they struggled to run the ball in the second half of the season last year and certainly played a big part of their downfall. I don't think this running back room is really that elite, but I think it's nothing that's too concerning either. Just a middle-of-the-road group, in my opinion.
Damian Taylor, over 1,000 rushing yards for Troy last fall. Great addition there. Looking at the pass-catching group, they're incredibly stacked at this position. Caden Lee is one of the notable returnees, mainly played out of the slot. He burned teams vertically all year, was used on screens often. Shows great concentration. I love the body control. Had 0 drops last fall. Overall, is a good feel for the game at 5'11", 175. I expect him to be probably the biggest breakout player in the conference on offense. Picked up DeJon Stribling, a large catch radius, a physical pass catcher at 6'2", 200. Really allows him to be sturdy, a sturdy option in the red zone. As impressive yak with some good long speed as well. Harrison Wallace from Penn State, player of great speed, should be a deep threat in this offense. Traylon Ray from West Virginia showed versatility in his alignment, 16.2 yards per catch over the last 2 seasons for him. Deuce Alexander, 6', 175, was a solid slot for Wake Forest, putting up 400 yards and catching a pass in all but 1 game. Caleb Odom transfers in as a ex-top 100 recruit. He's noted as a fluid route runner, does well in contested catch situations. Overall, a good athlete. They also have a couple of good freshmen here in Winston Watkins. He's the cousin of Sammy Watkins, a twitcher athlete who excels at route running. Then Caleb Cunningham, a big play wide receiver with great top-end speed. And that doesn't even include the tight ends, Nick. Daquan Wright, I thought he was phenomenal late in the year. Showcased great downfield catching and tight coverage. He was a good option down the seam. And then Luke Hazen, a physical player who showcases nice patience on his releases, understands zone defense as well. Not a typical tight end build, 6'3", 242. I guess he has that out of some size, though. Nice speed as well. I mean, they are incredibly deep. I know I just hit you with a lot of information, but they hit the portal heavy, Nick, on top of a few guys they get back, and this is a nasty group.
A nasty group here, one of the best in the SEC. I love what they've added here, so many different pieces. I'll start with the 2 guys they return, Caden Lee and Daquan Wright. Starting with Lee, I think Lee's a really talented player. I think he's got a ton of speed. I think he's really good at that wide receiver Y position, a potential huge breakout player in the SEC this year. 875 yards receiving last year, 15.3 yards per grab, and 2 scores for him, about 68 yards per game. Really good numbers there. Daquan Wright was a solid target as well, especially in the red zone. 400 yards receiving for him, 14.6 yards per grab, and 4 touchdowns last year for Wright. A player that I think could be really solid for this team. I like what I've seen out of him. Then when you want to talk about the additions, I think Stribling's a big one that you want to talk about immediately. This is a guy that was really good at his previous stops last year, 882 yards receiving, 17 yards per grab, and 6 touchdowns at Oklahoma State. A guy that's really good, high upside player that's a veteran of the game, probably going to slot him at the X position, a guy that's really solid for this team. Harrison Wallace, I think that's a really good add at Penn State, a guy that did have some production for the Lions last year, 720 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. Really good numbers there. I think this is a kid that you can put a lot in there. Traylon Ray is really solid as well. Caleb Odom, good adds. And then Deuce Alexander, I think is an underrated add as a younger player who got some solid reps last year at Wake Forest, 400 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns for him. A really good player that they added. This is a really deep room with a lot of different transfers that could have high impact early on.
Now let's look at the offensive line. Last season, we loved the offense, but we knew that the O-line would probably hold them back because we weren't really happy with the portal additions they had, and at the end of the day, none of them seemed to be all that greatly effective, but they all did play a lot of reps at the end of the day. Diego Pons will return at left tackle. He's an average player, does a good job of latching on, but doesn't move laterally very well against counters or hard workers off the edge due to stopping his feet too often. But he keeps him moving, though. He does well in that regard. 6'6", 340. I don't think he's a bad player, and I think he'll improve this fall. Left guard will be a battle between two transfers. Delano Townsend, who was a great pass blocker in his only year of UAB, and then P.J. Wilkins, who wasn't very good for Charlotte, but he is overwhelming at 6'7", 340. Bryson Sanders, an ex-4-star, has been flawless in his brief appearances. 6'6", 310, should slot right in as the starting center. They picked up Patrick Coites, was really highly coveted in the portal. Great position flexibility from Arkansas's 6'5", 313. Was pretty good in his 4 games last fall. And then Jaden Williams was pretty strong in his near 200 snaps at left tackle. Looks like he'll be moving over to the right side, though. Percy Lewis, 6'7", 355. A pretty good ad on his 3rd SEC school. Should be a reliable backup or even a starter if they put him in that role. Also picked up a high-ranked 4-star Devin Harper to help beef up the interior. I think this is a better offensive line than it was last year, Nick. I think that these portal additions certainly are going to take them a little bit farther than they did in 2024. What's your opinion?
Last year I said point blank that Ole Miss would not make the playoffs because the offensive line would let them down, and I was right. This was an offensive unit that was just not good enough on the O-line last year and ended up costing them later in the season when they could not run the ball against some of those better teams on the defensive line in the SEC. I'm a little more high on this unit this year, but I still think it's a liability. It's not the biggest liability on the offense, in my opinion. I think the running back room is probably the biggest liability in the offense, but I am a little concerned about this offensive line. Diego Pounds, I like him a lot. I think he's a guy at left tackle that you saw progress out of him last year. He could really be good for this team. Bryson Saunders, a good center that's getting better as he continues to learn the game. I think he's a reliable player. Same thing with Jaden Williams, who's getting better over time, although Devin Harper could be a high-impact freshman if he ends up finding his way on the field. Patrick Kudus is a really solid add at right guard. I think you're going to slot him in there and play some good football, or you maybe play Percy Lewis or P.J. Wilkins if one of those guys wins the job. The only position that I think is a guarantee for the transfer that moved in there is Delano Townsend at left guard. I think Townsend was really good last year at UAB, and this is a guy that has solid footwork and really good hands. I think you slot him at left guard. No issues at all. I think he'll be just fine to jump up in competition. I'm still a little concerned with offensive line. I think it's a little bit of a weaker unit in the SEC, but I think it's better than last year. I think that's certainly a big step forward for the Rebels here.
I think my offensive verdict perfectly sums up this unit. The Rebels' offense, once again, will pose tremendous threats to its opponents with a deep pass-catching group and offensive line of impressive size. Getting the run game going in conference play, though, is going to need to be more urgent, especially if a young QB. And I think I think Simmons will be very good, but they're going to have their growing pains. I think this unit will produce, but a step back is inevitable, Nick. B+ for me, and I absolutely love the wide receiver group. I think this will be an above-average offensive line, and Simmons could potentially cook. But the lack of the balance this year with that young QB, I think, certainly going to hold them back. So that's why I'm standing pat with a B+ right now.
I think it's a fair grade, right? This is a unit that certainly lacks balance, which I think could be a huge problem for this team as they go on. Last year, they were dominant through the air and dominant in terms of yards per game. They were second in yards per game and second in pass yards per game, while also being third in the nation in points. But they were 44th in rushing the ball, which I think is certainly a bit of a imbalance issue here for this offense. It may be worse this year. They might not be able to run the ball as effectively last year. I think the run game effectiveness is the key weakness, and the O-line I'm a little still weak on and concerned about that unit. A B+ unit, though, that can certainly elevate to an A if Simmons in the running back room gets their stuff in order and they play really solid, accurate football early on.
Now we move to the Rebels defense. This is a group that was flat out elite last season due to a lot of the work they did in the portal. And that's such a shame they didn't make the CFP because this defense really could have carried them far. They were a legit defense that could have stopped anybody in the country. They added 9 players in the portal, returning only 2 starters. They had the best pass rush in CFB, but now they lose all 4 starters up front. Added 2 great talents to come off the edge, Joe and Princewell Unimanellan. His portal ranking, I think, is a bit overblown. He's like 19th on On-Freeze rankings. He was unimpressive last year for Nebraska, only half a sack. Was a pretty poor tackler early on in the season as well. Deshaun Womack, he's an ex-5-star, barely got on the field for LSU in 2 seasons. A player of great pass rush upside, though. Cam Clark didn't play last fall. Cam Franklin only played about 100 snaps, but was great in his time. Showcases nice length, hustle, and nice first step. Also have Cameron Beavers and DJ Holmes. Collectively a very young edge group of no proven contributors. Interior defensive line, though, does return a few more proven players. Xavier Harris, 6'7", 320. He's been a great run defender in his career. Akiwo Stone, despite being only 6'2", 285, has also been stout versus the run. Behind them, Will Eccles, 6'3", 310, a high upside player. Being in the top 80 in last year's recruiting class, Jamarius Brown, 6'1", 315, was pretty impressive in his rotational role. I think this run defense will be fine. I don't know if they'll be second in the nation, but I think in top 20 is certainly a lock. They won't be elite by any means. I definitely wonder how good this edge group can be, though, Nick, because right now you're leaning on 2 guys that have not really produced in their career, and all we have on them is high rankings from coming out of high school. Like Prince William and Ellen should not be ranked as high as he is. And then Womack, his next 5-star, hasn't proven anything yet. So what's your concern with the edge group?
Yeah, I'm very concerned with the edge group. If you want to see a biggest weakness on this defense, is this edge group that just has to find a way to replicate the production they had last year. If you want a reason why Ole Miss is not going to make the playoffs this year, it's because of a drop in production off the edge rushers. That's what I'm going to book it as right now. I don't think Ole Miss is going to make the playoffs. I think it's because they're going to lack this production off the edge from Womack and Princewell. I think, Princewell's a really talented player. He's shown that he has some talent, but he's not been able to really put the pieces together. He's still struggling to put all the pieces together, the puzzle, to be a productive player. Womack, same deal. He's a guy that was a high-end player coming out of high school, but he's just not been able to find any sort of productive ability on the field yet, and that's a big concern. I think Cam Franklin and Cam Clark could be decent players as well, but they're big wild cards down there on the bottom of the depth chart. Can they find a way to get some moments in this year? Akeel Stone, he's a decent player to return last year, but he didn't do a whole lot. Only had 14 tackles, 1.5 sacks. Want to see more out of him potentially, but still a guy that's good rotational value for this defensive line. Maybe you get something out of him. I think the interior is the best part they return. I think Harris is a really good return, 32 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. While Jamarius Brown is also not a bad player to return, 20 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 1 pick for him, plus 2 pass breakups. I'm concerned about this defensive line. This is a unit that's got to find a way to be consistent. They're not going to play the same level they played last year. I think it's just impossible to replicate that sort of success, but they have to get, maybe 75%, 80% of what they did last year. I just don't know if I trust this unit to do that.
And of course, Sunterrain Perkins, he played a significant amount of his snaps off the edge last season. He was terrific, 14 TFL, 10.5 sacks. But it seems like I think they want to play him more, at middle linebacker for this upcoming season. This is a player of great athletic ability, heavy hitter, great technique when tackling, a great gap closer. Of course, that flexibility is going to be great for this defense. He was really good in coverage as well. He's an elite player, one of the best in college football. But I certainly, again, Nick, I think they want to play him more in the middle this year. But if they do really start to struggle off the edge, they're going to move him down fast. And I think that's a big beneficiary that allows them to kind of experiment with some of these other guys they have, at least early on.
Perkins is a big wild card, certainly. Maybe he'll come off the edge. Maybe he'll play a more traditional middle linebacker role where I think he has the talent to do so. He was the 4th highest tackler on this team last year with the 60 total tackles, plus the 14 tackles for loss and 10.5 sacks, aforementioned there. Plus he had a pick and 2 fumble recoveries. He's a very talented player, right? He's a high upside guy at linebacker that you could play as an edge rusher as well. I want to see what he looks like at linebacker, but I wouldn't be surprised if they move him down towards the edge there where he can really put some pressure on the quarterback, especially if they're struggling in conference play to get those sacks. They may make that move, and I wouldn't blame them if they do so.
Now we look at the rest of the linebacking group. TJ Daugherty was a really good tackler, but was an average run defender and was not good in coverage one bit. Tyler Banks enters his 4th year. Didn't play much, but was good in the bowl game. Made some nice adds in the portal. Jaden Yates was exceptional for Marshall, 120 tackles. Needs more consistency versus the run, though. Andrew Jones, on the other hand, was elite in that regard for Grambling State. He was a highly coveted portal entry at 6'2", 220, and was phenomenal for them. He was committed to South Carolina at one point, ended up flipping. Taj Chambers coming off his best of 4 seasons for Missouri State. He's played a lot of football. Pretty good room here, I would say, top to bottom. I think these transfers are going to come in and be able to make a respectable impact, Nick. I'd say the depth is pretty ideal. So if they wanted to move Perkins down the edge for a lot of his snaps, I think they'll be okay in doing so.
If you move Perkins down the edge, you probably plug in Yates there as the next guy up, and I think that's a really good player to plug in. He had 120 total tackles last year, 7.5 tackles for loss, 6 QB hurries. Really good numbers for the guy out of Marshall coming over out of the portal. You can certainly plug him in there. I think if you want to move Perkins, that's an easy thing to do. Tyler Banks, a guy that's been around the program for a little bit. TJ Daugherty, a guy that's got some experience as well. You could potentially see him step up. Andrew Jones, a high-impact potential player there. If he can reach his full potential, I think he'll be a really solid add out of the portal as well.
Now you look at the secondary for Ole Miss. This is a group that replaces a lot of experience and production. Chris Graves, though, he's going to step into a CB1 role. He's played sparingly through 3 years, has great length, the next wide receiver, so definitely has ball skills, and has been working on his technique for a couple of seasons. Jalen Braxton was a very good player 2 years ago as a true freshman for Arkansas. Missed 2024 due to injury. He was dominant in coverage in his freshman season. TJ Banks wasn't very good in his brief appearances. Cedric Beavers hasn't played on D yet in his career. Picked up a nice player from Washington State, Kaptana Gushikin. I like what he's going to be able to do in the slot. I think he can anchor down that position well. Wasn't as consistent in coverage this past season, but he did improve his run defense. So I think Pete Golding and the staff are going to be able to get him in touch to play in this conference. The safety group, they're going to see a 4th-year player, Nick Cole, step into a bigger role. He's barely played in his career as well. Anthony Robinson, a 3-star athlete in his 2nd year, will look to make a strong push to start. You pick up Sage Ryan from LSU. Significantly got better in coverage the past couple of seasons. Run defense skills remains a liability, though. Secondary was quite good last year across the board. I think they're going to take a bit of a big step back here. I'm not all that confident in this group as a whole. I think the starting CBs can be good. And Ryan, I think, will be the top dog at safety. But all around, they don't seem all that fearful at the moment. The versatility just doesn't scream a whole lot to me. I think Jalen Braxton will be great. He's already proved he can do that in this conference. And, of course, the late addition of Ricky Fletcher from South Alabama is certainly helpful. But I'm not all that bullish on this secondary.
I'm not either. I think this is secondary a little bit weaker for this conference. I do like Fletcher out of South Alabama. All right, this is a kid that I saw a lot in him last year in that South Alabama defense. He had 38 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and 12 pass breakups. He's a really good coverage asset. A really nice late add there. I think, a really good move by Pete Golden to go and grab a guy. You're probably going to slot him in at left cornerback. Going to probably beat out Chris Graves, who's been on the roster, and TJ Banks, who didn't really show me as a ton as a freshman. Jalen Braxton is a really solid add as well. When he's fully healthy, he's a great player. Sage Ryan, I think, is a good veteran guy that you can add who's got some good experience at LSU in the past. Didn't do a whole lot at times for them. 42 total tackles last year and 5 pass pickups, though, is not terrible. This is a guy that you can get something out of. I think there's some solid assets there. You listed off a couple different pieces they added out of the portal that could be really solid for this team. The secondary, it's not a glaring miss compared to the edge rushing unit, but it's still a unit I'm a little bit weak on. They struggled against the pass at times last year, right? They were 86 in the nation, gave up 230 yards per game. Definitely not a great look. This was a unit that was a lot better against the run last year, and the secondary has to find a way to improve. This team wants to make the playoff.
And I do want to clarify, we're referring to 2023 of Ricky Fletcher. He didn't play in 24, but everything we said was from 2 seasons ago. So we'll clear that up right there. B grade for me, Nick, with this defense. They were an A+ last year. It was wasted, though, as they missed the CFP. Now they look to overcome those losses. A big step back is in store. Perkins can't do it all. I think he's certainly going to try, but I'm not all that confident the ads on the D-line and the portal are going to elevate like they did last season. And, of course, the portal rankings, I think, are kind of overblown on some of the guys they got. The secondary will also not bring game level of playmaking to the table as they did last fall. A B for me, Nick, is that being a little bit too harsh? I'm just not that confident in the guys they picked up in the edge, and that's really going to dictate a lot.
I think a B is a very fair grade for you. This was a defense that was really good last year. 14.4 points per game is a ridiculous number on paper, but this is a unit that lost a ton of talent on the defensive line, and the secondary is a full new unit here. While I do like the guys, and I think these are guys that could certainly step up and be really good for this team, I'm still concerned about some of the depth. I'm concerned a little bit about what this secondary can do overall. This defense, I think it's a wait-and-see approach for me, but I'm a little bullish on them. I just don't feel phenomenal about this unit.
Looking at the Ole Miss schedule and prediction, it's going to be an interesting season for Lane Kiffin. As a great team last year, blew a CFP chance, only for him to complain about the committee all offseason. Offense has some great talent, intriguing young QB, but will he go through growing pains in this tough conference? I certainly think that is likely. While I think this defense will regress back to being kind of maybe a mid-level unit at worst, unless the new pass rush, can really step up and prove me wrong. In that case, if they're a strength, I think the defense will be quite respectable and they can compete. I think this team will still be really good. The non-conference is a little bit tougher with Washington State and Tulane, but you still have Citadel and Georgia State free wins. I think the 3 losses here, Georgia and Oklahoma, are kind of a given. And then at home against Florida, I think they're going to lose that one as well. I think they upset LSU September 27th. They've just given the Tigers headaches over the last couple of years. So I think that's one that they're going to win. And I think South Carolina as well coming to town will be another victory they can pick up against the defense. It's also probably going to take some steps back this year. Trap game week 2, Nick, against Kentucky. That's still going to be looming large. What happened last year is going to be on their minds. And I think that's going to be a bit of a slippery slope for them, especially with this young QB against the defense in Kentucky. That's going to be respectable. I think they get the job done at the end of the day, but we thought that would happen last year, and well, it didn't.
Certainly an odd scheduling placement playing Kentucky in week 2. Certainly keep an eye on that game. Kind of odd to have a conference game that early in the season. Maybe it catches Ole Miss sleeping. Certainly have to keep an eye on that. The one loss that I gave them that you did not give them was to LSU at home. I think LSU is just a phenomenal team here. I think LSU is going to find a way to win that game and get the job done, although I could certainly see Ole Miss beating them. They did beat them 2 years ago in Oxford. Kiffin does seem to rattle Brian Kelly at times last year. They probably should have won the game in Baton Rouge last year, but ended up falling late in overtime. I agree with the other 3 losses, though, right? A back-to-back stretch, brutal trips to Athens, that is, and then to Norman, Oklahoma. I think you're going to lose both of those games. Oklahoma, I'm very high on that team, a very talented roster. I could see them losing to Florida as well. It makes a ton of sense to me. I think Florida's a team that's going to really play some good football. I don't hate what Ole Miss has done, but I think Kiffin has not shown to me that he can win enough big games to get this team into the playoff. I think there's just not enough talent on this roster. I think they have too many holes, replaced too many guys for this team to be a CFP contender. The SEC is so deep this year, and it really is wide open, but it still is so deep, and I think this is just a tough spot spot where Ole Miss will get shuffled out towards the middle of the pack. They'll end up going 8-4, and it'll be disappointing for those fans. It'll be disappointing for Kiffin. He's going to probably run his mouth all over Twitter again and make a bunch of comments about the committee and strength of schedule and all that nonsense, which is really going to be unwarranted because at the end of the day, his team's not going to go out and win enough football games to get the job done. A good roster, but not enough to get them where they want to be. They want to be in the college football playoffs, and again, unfortunately for me, they're going to fall just short of that hurdle.
It's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.